Thank you, Chair. Dear Mr. Commissioner, thank you also for your commitment and your broad work into the field of humanitarian aid. And I would like to connect to a couple of issues that you were raising already. And in the context of the Ukraine crisis, the issue of food security is most probably one of the great concerns we have, and especially in countries that are really dependent on wheat imports, and the prices of this grain that we know is very often imported and subsidized is rising. And here comes the, for me, interesting storyline that it seems that the shortage of wheat from Ukraine and Russia does not lead necessarily to in the sense of too little food available there on the world market, but it's rather to the price increases, also because of the supply chains that are less stable. And I just recently heard from a humanitarian aid worker which works in Yemen, and she clarified this statement, saying it's not the food that is lacking. We have the food, but it's the price that it's just too high, and people cannot afford this. And therefore, it seems for me the all-important question is, doesn't we have to strengthen the food sovereignty of countries in the long term in this context, so that we support in particular, for example, small farmers to help themselves in the longer run? So apart from the short-term dependencies, wouldn't it make sense to prevent hunger crisis as a nexus task and promote smallholder farming in order to empower them in the end so that small people can have food security in their own hands? And also a point that I would like to raise is, could we perhaps also replace wheat, which tends to be the cheapest one of these grains, and to purchase other locally adapted cereals, also in the view to acute food shortages? And the second point here is the EU has a number of humanitarian obligations. You were just naming them and raising all these issues like Syria and also Yemen, which I just mentioned. So we have different challenges. So even if member states provide fresh money nowadays for Ukraine through fundraising, wouldn't we need to substantially increase the humanitarian aid or instrument in general, and also not only by diverting money from A to B, so just to come up in a broader sense? And also, and this is maybe kind of a crystal ball, but how big is the gap of the overall amount available for humanitarian aid in order to react adequately to crisis? If that could be named, I would be interested in this information as well. Thank you.
Honourable Luque, you mentioned the food security, and I would like to thank you for pointing out to the fact that when you talk about food security, we don't necessarily mean the lack of food on the market, but the prices that are so high that make food inaccessible to a large number of people. And that is basically the case that we are facing now, that we are witnessing now as a consequence, one of the global impacts of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Food is there, but markets have reacted to the Russian invasion on Ukraine by raising the prices of wheat, the prices of vegetable oil and the like, which went up 60% this year alone. And this places a lot of people out of reach of the food they need. And that's why we support, rather than traditional provision of food items to people who are food insecure, we favor more modern methods like cash-based programs, so that to enable people in need to buy their own food with the cash assistance. We have discussed on our own initiative, on the Commission's initiative, the problem of the rising food insecurity, in particular as a consequence of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, in a number of settings already. In the beginning of this month, we organized in Paris a high-level event on food security in Sahel and Lake of Chad region. We have also organized event in Rome together with the French presidency of the Council and with the Rome-based UN agencies, notably the World Food Programme, about the same issue. And tomorrow I will be in Geneva with Martin Griffiths, the Chief of Office of the United Nations for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. We will talk about food insecurity in the Horn of Africa and how to go about it. The event in Paris on Sahel and Lake Chad was a successful event. We have been able to mobilize almost 1 billion euros pledges from donors in order to address the food security problem in the Sahel and Lake of Chad, not only from the emergency point of view, but also in order to address the root causes and build resilience and provide mid and long-term solutions by building resilience of local agriculture and stimulating local production, which of course is the right way to go. As for your question whether we would need to increase humanitarian aid and by how much, the fact is that the funding gap has been growing for years already and has spiked over the last 2 years, first by the pandemic and second by the proliferation of conflicts and the negative impact that these have on food security globally. So now we have a funding gap that we have never had. And in the communication already last year, in our communication on humanitarian action, we tried to identify ways to tackle the problem of the funding gap. One way is to increase the funding. But the fact is that already a very narrow group of donors provide most of the fundings. And this problem, we have this problem both within the EU, where the Commission and 5 member states provide 90% of global EU funding. That means that the remaining 22 member states provide less than 10%. So that's not fair responsibility sharing, if you ask me. And we have the similar problem globally, where a handful of donors, in particular the United States, Germany and the European Commission, provide about 2/3 of all global humanitarian funding. So you can't really ask those who already provide most to provide even more. We probably can do more by stimulating others to increase their share in this, what I call, responsibility for international humanitarian action. But there are also other ways of tackling the funding gap that we tried to identify in our communication. One is to use the available resources in a more effective way, with anticipatory action, for instance, with greater involvement of local responders and the like. And we also need to find ways to reduce the humanitarian needs. For that to happen, we need to look into the root causes, the drivers of humanitarian crisis, and that we can only do in a partnership with our development and peace-building colleagues in the so-called nexus approach. And with this brings me to the